Hey, how's it going? I'm Matt Arnold, certified sommelier in Raleigh, North Carolina at The Wine Feed, located at 602 Glenwood. We're part of the Glenwood South neighborhood and have been there since 2011, in this location since 2013. Yeah, I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about blind tasting tonight. So, as a sommelier, I get to study wine, read about it, taste it. The one thing people always ask about is the blind tasting part. It's not just a fancy parlor trick that you get to do at parties and stuff. It's not a magic trick. It's more deductive tasting. And it's kind of like doing a math problem, just a lot more fun than doing a math problem because there's wine involved. So, a couple different things. We're going to break it down into 4 steps. So, the first is sight. You're going to look at the wine and analyze a couple things there. The second is smell. So, we are going to smell the wine and analyze a lot there. About 85% of what we're going to do is going to be in the smell. And then there's the tasting part. So we're going to take those 3 parts, and then that takes us to the 4th, which is the conclusion. And we're going to conclude on what we think. And if we've done sight, smell, and taste correctly, it should lead us to 1 or 2 conclusions, and we can narrow it down from there. So let's go over just a couple things, and then you guys can get into your wines. So the first thing that you want to do is when you pour a little bit of wine in your glass, tilt it and look through the glass. Is it sort of purpley? Is it electric around the rim? Does the color change from the center to the outside? That's going to tell you a couple things. If this is a darker red wine, that tells me it's a thicker skinned grape, and it's probably not something like Pinot Noir or Gamay or Tempranillo. It could be Tempranillo. But the heavier the color and the darker the color, typically the heavier the grape. Also, it didn't change much from the middle to the outside, so that tells me it's also a younger wine. Then I'm going to swirl the wine in the glass. So this does a couple of things. It breaks up the aromatics. It gets alcohol moving in the glass, and alcohol is a vessel for delivering aromas. It's not just for having fun. So you're going to see these sort of legs develop, or some people call them tiers, around the glass. So you swirl and then see how long it takes them to come down. So they're hanging, then they start to come down. It could be hard to see from the video here. Sometimes they'll stain the side of the glass. So this one stains the side of the glass. That confirms that it is indeed a fuller bodied and heavier wine. So here's the fun part. I'll take a smell. So when I smell a wine, I'm looking for a couple things. When I smell a red wine, I'm looking for fruit. Is fruit the first thing I smell or the second thing I smell? If fruit is the first thing that I smell, or if I said name 5 fruits that are in there, could you do that easily? If the answer is yes to both of those or either of those, it's probably a wine from the New World, meaning not Europe. If the fruits are a little hard to smell, it could be maybe a wine that has age on it, or more than likely, it's a wine from Europe. And European wines tend to be a little less fruit forward and a little bit more earth dominated. So you have fruit notes and earth notes, and the two can sort of compete with each other. You can have both, but there tends to be one out in front of the other. So this is definitely a more fruit dominated wine, and I would say that I smell things like blackberry, black cherry, cassis, currant, sugar plum, all these heavier, darker fruits, and that leads me to be thinking a certain thing. Those are things I would typically associate with Cabernet Sauvignon, versus more red fruit dominated things like cherry, maybe cranberry, and raspberry. I might associate those with Pinot Noir. And the fruits here are really fresh and lively, and they're not like dried out smelling. They're not stewed or cooked or grilled, and sometimes you'll get some of those notes too. It can be hard to identify fruits when sometimes it smells like an underripe plum or underripe cherry. They're not as obvious, and they're a little bit more closed and shut down. Those might be European wine traits. So another thing I'm going to look for in smelling is there any spice or things like that. Spice might be an indicator of oak, and what I mean by spice is like cinnamon, clove, nutmeg, cardamom, vanilla, like baking spices and those sweeter spice notes. And do I get any of those? And yes, there are some here in this wine. If you don't get any of that, it's probably a wine that has not seen oak aging. So those are kind of the big things you look for there. And then you want to say, are there any earthy notes? So like here I get a little bit of like cedar, maybe tobacco, things that aren't fruits that are still in there. There's some other sort of, balsa wood, eucalyptus. There's some herbaceousness to this, but slightly it's underneath the fruit. And then the fun part, we get to taste. So when you taste, it's important to work the wine all around your mouth. So you might hear me making sounds and stuff, and that might sound kind of funny, maybe kind of gross, but that's me aerating the wine in my mouth and moving it around my tongue to hit different parts of my tongue that are picking up different flavors and different senses of flavor. So it's really hard for me to talk right now. This is a really tannic wine. So tannin is a mouthfeel. You can't taste tannin, you can't smell tannin, you feel it. You take a sip, then rub your tongue on the roof of your mouth. If it feels like it's pulling kind of like sandpaper, that's a wine that has a good amount of tannin in it. If it's got acidity, you're gonna take a sip and then you'll salivate. So I'm salivating a little bit, but not a ton. All wine in general is a pretty acidic beverage. Just generally speaking, all wine is pretty acidic. So it may take a while to formulate that scale of what is really acidic and what's not acidic. And same thing with tannin. So another thing to gauge, is this light-bodied or full-bodied? Did it taste like water in my mouth when I was going around, or was it more like half and half or whole milk? This was more like whole milk. So this is a fuller bodied wine, and that would kind of confirm that. So you've got tannin, you've got body, you've got acidity. There's one more thing, alcohol. When I take a sip, blow out, does it taste like I just shot Patron or some other tequila, or does it taste like I just had a Miller Lite? This is on the higher end side. There feels like there's some more heat to it. So that takes us to the conclusion. So a couple things here. We've narrowed down maybe what a couple grapes might be, might not be. And I'm happy to help out with that. But the biggest thing here in deciding where it's from is going to be really important. So if a wine has high alcohol and is fruit forward, and has lower acidity, it is from the New World. Those are very common things in the New World. So that's higher alcohol, more fruit, and lower acidity. That tends to happen in the New World. So if you have 2 out of 3 of those, you can make a strong case for that. On the flip side, if the wine is from Old World, meaning Europe, you might have higher acidity, lower alcohol, and more earth-driven notes. So that's lower alcohol, higher acidity, and more earth-driven notes. And there are wines that can be confusing. There are grapes that typically have higher acidity than others. So even in the New World, they like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc has really high acid, but when it's grown in New Zealand, it still has high acidity. So that's one you can't really rely on there. And that may be kind of tricky. But I wish you all the best of luck, and cheers.